Welcome to Film at 50, a podcast that celebrates semi-centennials in the world of cinema. I'm your host, Brian Rowe, and I'm very thrilled to welcome Dave White from Linoleum Knife and The Wrap to Film at 50 today to talk about the Poseidon Adventure, the biggest film of end of 72, all of 73, 9 Oscar nominations. This is a big one. Thanks for being here, Dave. How are you doing?
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here. You'll understand why in a moment.
Yes. Alonso Duralde, your husband, reached out almost a year ago and said, if you're doing Poseidon Adventure, you have to have Dave on. So can we start there? So why was it so important, Dave, that you come on for this movie?
First, I need to explain myself a little bit. I did not tell him to say that. Although I'm very happy to be here, I did not push him to say that. Also, there are better Poseidon experts than me, but I'm thinking of one right now, my friend Brian Boskind, who used to live in Los Angeles and would organize big, elaborate screenings of the film. Cast would come in this is the guy. He's the Poseidon man, but I'm, a deep enthusiast about this film and have been since 1972.
That's fantastic. So before we get into the movie, Dave, you haven't been on the podcast before. I'd love to just open with a question about what role has film played in your life? How did you get involved with film when you were younger? And if you have a few all-time favorites, I'd love for you to share those.
When I was before elementary school, I was 4.
Okay.
My parents, I have vivid memories of my parents taking me and my other younger brother to the movies. Always, little kid movies. Now, I don't know how much you know about this, but in the late 1960s, early 1970s, this was sort of the golden age of the kid matinee on the weekends.
Mm-hmm.
There was even MGM had sort of I guess you could call it a repertory circuit of children's films and they tagged them as MGM's children's matinees. And every Saturday and Sunday, if you lived in a town that was, big enough to do this, you had a movie theater that would host these things. There'd be these kid movies, and they could be anything. It could be really old films like The Adventures of Robin Hood, or newer films like Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, or A Boy Named Charlie Brown, Snoopy Come Home, those two. There, old Godzilla movies fit into that. And every weekend there'd be a movie aimed at kids. And my parents would either take me, or because this was the early 70s, I'm 58 years old. I was born in 1964.
Okay.
This was back in the day. If you didn't live well, no, it didn't really matter where you lived. You would just drop your child off at the movie theater, and it didn't matter. I was 7, 8 years old, and my parents would just be like, "Okay, goodbye. Go enjoy the movie, and we'll come pick you up later." But my parents would take me, and I quickly became obsessed with going to the movies. It was very important to me. I was not a sports kid. My brothers were, but I was not. I would have always preferred to stay in my room and read a book, play a board game against myself. I wanted to go to the movies almost more than anything. And who knows what prompted that obsession, but the fun of going to the movies, the fun of being at the movies and seeing, films was something very exciting to me from an extremely young age. I had a little notebook in elementary school, and I would write down the names of the movies that I had seen. Never in my life did I ever think to myself, when I'm a middle-aged man, I'm going to be a real film critic and do that for a living. It didn't occur to me that I didn't even know that was a job, honestly, until I started watching Siskel and Ebert on TV in the 70s. And so that became very important to me. And the film we're going to talk about today was my first grown-up movie. The first film that was actually sort of beyond my age,
Uh-huh.
uh, but I was determined. Not only was I going to see this film, but I already knew before I saw it that I was going to love it. You've seen the original trailer for this version, this 1972 version. Um, you get all the exciting ship turning upside down bits in
Mm.
the and one of the things that would happen at these children's matinees was whatever theater you were in, they were going to show you the trailers for the adult films that were going to be opening that week.
Hmm.
The films that were playing at night that you were not going to get to go see. Um, but I remember seeing the trailer for the Poseidon Adventure and going home, and I was 7 at the time, and telling my mom, "Will you take me to this? I have to go see this movie." Um, and as when it finally came out, she said, "No, no, that looks too grown up for you. It looks scary
Hmm.
and violent, and people die. You shouldn't. No, not yet. You're too young." And I was like, but I'm almost an adult now. I am 7 years old, fully capable of understanding all adult things, and I am practically grown. It's time for you to respect me as an adult, and we should go to see this film. That did not play. Uh, so anyway, that was how I became sort of obsessed with movies, just by being taken to them,
Hmm.
and my early sort of decision that this was going to be a movie I could see, even though it wasn't for kids. I was determined I was going to see this film, and I did. It was such a huge movie that not only, as you said, it was nominated for a bunch of Oscars, but it made like $100 million at the
Yeah.
box office, which
Hmm.
is unthinkable in that era of cinema history. It was the biggest movie. It was released in December of 1972.
Hmm.
It was the biggest grossing film of 1973
That's right.
at the American box office.
Hmm.
It just played and played and played. In fact, it was so popular that they re-released it in 1974.
Hmm.
And by then I was 9, so I was fully ready to vote and go to war. And And I got my older brother. I begged him. I said, "It's time. I can do it now. I should be allowed to go." And he took me, and my life was changed then.
So you didn't see it in a theater until 74, or did you
Yes.
see it on, you didn't see it in its original run? You were too
No,
young, just a little
the
too young.
72, the December of 72 run
Hmm.
through 73, I was told by people who did not understand me that I was not allowed to go. But then, they re-released it in 74, because that happened all the time. If a
Hmm.
film was big enough, it would just keep getting put back into theaters.
Right.
Remember when I was a child, The Sound of Music would keep coming back
Hmm.
to movie theaters. That movie came out in 1965, but it was so popular. And, it had been, I think, on television by once, maybe by that point. But there was no cable TV, there was no home video, there was nothing. You had to wait for the movie to come back to a theater if it was popular enough.
Hmm.
And something like The Sound of Music was popular enough. Like that came back to theaters in 75, 76, and played for a really long time again, because, one of the most beloved films of all time. Um, but so, yeah, Poseidon came back in 74. I remember there was even a re-release poster uh, that was not as cool as the first poster. The first poster also incredibly enticing, because they used to do these illustrations for posters. Posters used to not always just have, like somebody's face on it, like lazy posters that we have now. They would hire artists to recreate a scene from the film, and that would be like a painting of the
Hmm.
scene on the poster. The Poseidon Adventure had a shocking, enticing poster, big letters across the top that just said "Hell upside down," and then the movie, the ballroom exploding with water, and people like
Hmm.
grasping for the whatever, I guess the camera, like they have to escape the water. When you're 7 and you see that gigantic poster in a movie theater lobby, you just think, "Oh yeah, 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 whatever that is." that looks very exciting, and I
Yeah.
have to watch that. Yeah.
What I find interesting about its success is that when they were trying to get it made, a lot of people thought this was going to be a disaster. I watched a short documentary about the making of it, and
Yeah.
producer Irwin Allen, like, he had to fight for 2 years to get it made because the studios thought it would be a flop. It would fail.
They were, it was the early 70s, and the studios did not know what they wanted to do in the early 70s.
Yeah.
They knew that the days of the big budget spectacle film, those weren't cool anymore. Like the new Hollywood was happening, and Scorsese and Coppola and Easy Rider and Five Easy Pieces and Carnal Knowledge, and these small movies that were predominantly bummers
Mm-hmm.
and aimed at a young audience. Um, baby boomers, like the 20s, people in their 20s.
Mm-hmm.
That was what the studios were thinking. Well, this is what we got to do now. We got to chase the youth. So Irwin Allen comes along, and he doesn't do small films, and he likes big adventure spectacles. He also made the Towering Inferno a few
Mm-hmm.
years later after that. Yeah, they had a hard time getting it made, mostly because they said, well, we're afraid of the budget. We're afraid of of trying to make this gigantic thing look right.
Mm-hmm.
If you all you needed to do at that time was read the novel and understand that you would need to build some really elaborate sets
Mm-hmm.
for something like this. There was no CGI back then.
Mm-hmm.
You had to make everything out of steel and in a soundstage. Eventually they did. They said, okay, we're going to do it. And they did it. And they built these elaborate sets, innovative sets. I don't know how
Mm-hmm.
much you read about that, but like the technical aspects of this film were kind of stunning.
Mm-hmm.
The ballroom set could lift, like they could lift it up to 30 degrees, which is kind of a lot, enough to make people fall in one direction. And when it came time to shoot the scene where the ship turns upside down and the ballroom is literally turning upside down, they used a combination of this sort of like hydraulic set and cameras that were on gyroscopes that could just spin and turn upside down. And the rest was like close-ups of somebody falling into something, or like, they dropped a piano from the ceiling. Like there were probably not more than one or two takes of this thing to reset that and make it clean and nice again, and then turn it into literal chaos and death.
Mm-hmm.
Would be a lot of that's an over budget day if you have to do that again.
Yeah.
Apparently this film came in like 2 days under schedule and right on budget. Like Ronald Neame, the director,
Mm-hmm.
and Irwin Allen were like, oh, we're going to do it. And they did it.
Yeah. Ronald Neame, who had just made Scrooge, he directed Scrooge from 1970 and The Prime of Miss Jean Brodie in 1969. So he
Ronald
could do everything.
Yeah, I'm sorry to interrupt you there. Ronald Neame was one of those guys who just made like all kinds of different films.
Mm-hmm.
But he really was good with actors and getting sort of humanity out of them, and not just, pawns in a spectacle of a ship turning upside down.
Right.
I think really makes this film something more special than it might otherwise have been.
Yeah, I think one of the best things about this movie, which I just watched the first time last night.
That blows my mind.
At age 38 was my first watch of this movie. I was really taken with all of the great character moments. I think that this movie could have been kind of a throwaway if it wasn't really interested in the people in the movie. And we get a great cast in this, and each of them gets a moment to shine, especially Shelley Winters, who got an Oscar nomination. And I think that's what makes the movie endure throughout the decades.
Oh, for sure. I mean, not just the spectacle of it.
Right.
And it is a spectacle. And the more you get away from it 50 years later, to look back and think, this kind of film, they wouldn't do this today. well, and then they did do it. They
They
did a
did do it.
2006 version. We'll talk about that later,
Yeah.
but they did a 2006 version that relied heavily on computer generated effects.
Hmm.
And there were none of that then. It was
Hmm.
all real stuff. And so, but more to the point, actors, I think now would be perhaps less inclined to go through the physical punishment of
Right.
making a film like this. You read now, and you're supposed to be very impressed, and you should be very impressed because of what he does. It's super dangerous. Tom Cruise constantly doing his own stunts,
Yeah.
and and in a very sort of like old school Jackie Chan way, where you think you're gonna die. Um, that is impressive, but it's not the norm. And when you look at the production history of this film, every actor on screen, with few exceptions in a few different scenes, they were in peril. Like
Hmm.
all of them got injured in one way or another while making the film. They've
Hmm.
all talked about it. The ones that are still alive, but even before the ones that are no longer with us passed away, they all have talked about how, oh yeah, we were like sprained ankles and cuts and burns, and because
Hmm.
there's fire on the
There's
set.
real fire.
There's one scene. It's a blink and you'll miss it. But the kid in the movie, he's like 11. His name is Eric Shea.
Hmm.
If his voice sounds familiar to you when you're watching the film, you should know that his two brothers were the rotating voices of Linus in the early Peanuts specials in the
Oh.
60s and 70s. So, and all three of those brothers have that Linus voice. So, but there's a scene where they're in the engine room. It's near the end of the film, and they are near some really big fire.
Hmm.
The kid gets a little too close to the fire and he flinches away from it, and they catch that on camera, and it had left it in the movie because it's real. Like I don't know of a stage of a set parent who'd be like, yeah, it's fine, put my 11-year-old next to that giant fire over there, and make him climb up some wires while you're at it. He might fall into the fire, it'll be okay.
Yeah, like the scene of them climbing that long ladder, and then of course the long swimming sequence where it looks like that's the real actors swimming, and I'm like, is
Yes,
like, how are they getting this on film and keeping them safe in 72?
they
I
did
was
it in
thinking about that.
a tank. There was a tank that they
Hmm.
built, but um the but that these are long swimming sequences.
Yeah.
They're underwater for a long time.
Yeah.
Particularly Gene Hackman and Shelley Winters. You're thinking, how did they live swimming through this tank like this? Um, like every day, it was like a 70-75 day shoot.
Hmm.
Every day after all the nice clean, we're on a boat, we're on a vacation, we're at a party in the ballroom. The minute that was done, and they shot
Hmm.
it sequence. The minute
Okay.
that was done, they showed up at the set every day and were hosed down with water and oil every day. You are earning your money when you are all day soaking wet, covered in like grease,
Hmm.
because that's what they had to shoot it in sequence for the clothing continuity,
Right.
because their clothing kept ripping and getting stained and like covered in sludge. Um, yeah, Shelley
Yeah.
Winters was apparently very cranky on set,
I would bet.
to the point where like she'd be impatient or angry about something, and Jack Albertson, who played her
Hmm.
husband, who was also Grandpa Joe in Willy Wonka and the
Yep.
Chocolate Factory the year before, um, he would take her aside and just play cards with her to
Mm.
keep her from yelling at people all the time.
Yeah, I feel like while they were making the movie, there might have been a sense of like, is anything going to come of this? Is this going to be watchable? That it
Right.
would become this huge hit. Probably
Yeah.
wasn't being thought about on set while they were shooting these little action
No,
scenes.
I'm sure they were thinking about that. I'm sure they were just thinking, can I just be in dry clothes for a minute?
Yeah, exactly. But one thing I thought that was a really great masterstroke was getting Gene Hackman to play the lead. He was coming right off of his Oscar win for The French Connection. That
Right.
film came out at the end of 71. He won his Oscar in March or April. And then
Yeah.
this started shooting in April. So
Yeah.
it was like right around the time. they could have gone with like a John Wayne or some like big, movie star, but I like that they went with a great actor for that role because he really makes this a ride worth taking.
What you realize while you're watching it, I mean, and they sold it like this. They marketed the film featuring how many people in the cast already had Academy Awards, like 6 or 7 of them already had Oscars.
Yeah.
In the main cast, like we're not just talking about people who show up for a scene or two. Like the main cast, most of them had already won Academy Awards.
You're right.
So you're not dealing with fly by night actors. You're dealing with people who are respected in what they do. Now, the 2 youngest, Pamela Sue Martin and Eric Shea, they had not been in much before. I think this was Pamela Sue Martin's 2nd film.
Okay.
She went on to TV. She was Nancy Drew in the 70s on television. But everybody else, I think maybe with the exception of Stella Stevens and Carol Lindley, had an Academy Award already.
Yeah.
But even the 2 that didn't have Oscars deliver like solid, serious, like empathy earning performances where you're invested in their survival by the end of the film. And for me as a child watching it, not only I told you it was my first grown-up movie. It was the first movie I ever saw that routinely, every few moments over the course of the film, not every few moments, but every few scenes over the course of the film, a beloved character dies. And that also is not something that takes place quite with much frequency today. The characters you love in a movie now don't often die because they want a sequel. They want that person in the movie for the next one, if there's going to be a next one. Unless going in, this is a movie about someone who dies. If it's an action film, an adventure film, and there's the risk of death, that character is going to be pushed maybe to the brink of death, but not die. Somehow survive.
Yeah.
But in this movie, you start out with a cast of a dozen people, and by the end of it, like 6 of them are left, and you care about these people. You love these people. The performances are so good. And the tension is so strong throughout that when they die, it is a loss, not just narratively, but you feel it as an audience member.
Yeah, that's absolutely true of Shelley Winters. I mean, she does this really heroic act, and then it's like a heart attack she experiences right after she comes back up.
Yeah.
And so that takes a few scenes. Like her husband comes over and hugs her, and it's really moving. It's a very emotional moment in the movie.
There is there's so much of that because the script distills so much from the novel down to it's the best of what you would get in the novel. We can talk about the book if you want.
Yeah, so you've read the book too? Okay, so tell me about the book of this.
The book was published in 1969.
Okay.
Paul Gallico was the author. And it is a grim and brutal book because what it's really about is a minister's angry rebellion against God and a group of terrible people stuck in a boat that is upside down. And by the end of the book, you're just happy to finish the book because most of the characters are completely and utterly awful. And so what they did was they softened all of those personalities in the film so that you could love them all. Even what I would call perhaps the meanest character in the film, which is Linda, played by Stella Stevens. In the book, she's reprehensibly bad. And when she dies in the book, everyone else is thinking, good. Like they're not going to miss her. But at the end of this film, and I know we're spoiling it left and right, it's a 50-year-old movie, but it doesn't matter. These are not spoilers, they're selling points. There is a heart-wrenching moment when Linda dies in the film. And Ernest Borgnine plays her husband, and he's a tough guy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
he's the tough guy, and he howls with a kind of anguish that you aren't expecting, and he breaks down and sobs, and he screams at Gene Hackman,
Mm-hmm.
"You killed the only thing I ever loved." I've seen this film so many times, I can recite that dialogue from
Mm.
by heart. My Linda. It is it's a devastating moment in the
Mm-hmm.
film. Um, Along with, again, the death of, Shelley Winters' character, the death of even the death of Roddy McDowall's
Mm.
character. He dies early, and you're like, no, 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 I like you. You're Roddy McDowall. You're in Planet of the Apes. We all enjoy you.
Yeah, poor Roddy McDowall. He's in all of these iconic films of the era. He's also in Bedknobs and Broomsticks for like 5 minutes. He's like,
Yeah,
he shows up and he's never in them very long.
yeah, yeah, but he kept working.
Yeah, he kept working all the way into Fright Night and all sorts of great stuff.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
But so what, like, take me through like your opinion of the movie when you saw it in the theater in 74 versus now. Like, did anything change throughout the decades? Like, do you feel differently about it now versus then?
When you are a child,
Mm-hmm.
take everything at face value. You don't understand the world around you very well,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So it was not something I knew about, that this wasn't considered a cool movie. It
Mm.
was just considered a very popular movie. And in fact, lots of critics at the time, they thought it was kind of a you know, a dumb film.
Yeah.
And I have seen, and so that escaped me. I was 10. I was just in it for the excitement and the adventure and the emotional, heft of it. It has now been 50 years, and I've seen this film. I can't even count how many times I've seen this film.
Wow. Okay.
I just kept going back to it. I kept going back to it and back to it and back to it. And when cable TV came along and home video came along, it was just kind of always on cable somewhere. If it happened to be on a weekend afternoon, and it was 10 minutes in or 30 minutes in, I would stop what I was doing and sit down and watch the rest. Partially, I guess, to relive that childhood
Mm.
excitement. But I firmly believe that this is still a very exciting film,
Mm-hmm.
a very engaging, sort of, gripping drama and suspense, drama about survival, that I still feel the same affection and even critical, now that this is my job,
Mm.
critical admiration for this film, based on like the technical aspects of it, the performances, the very concentrated, development of character in the film. Some things have not aged well, I will give it. I have been to screenings. I live in Los Angeles, and every New Year's, between Christmas and New Year's Eve, one or two of the local repertory theaters in town will show this.
Mm.
Quentin Tarantino owns a movie theater in Los Angeles called the New Beverly, and their deal is they only show films on film.
Mm-hmm.
So you'll always get a 35 millimeter print of a film, and most of them are from his personal collection. So you get good prints.
Mm-hmm.
They show it most years. The American Cinematheque here, which is a big organization, they will often show it frequent during New Year's Eve,
New Year's. Mm-hmm.
like around New Year's Eve. And um, I've been in those audiences to see it. Like, I've gone to see it a lot. Like, we've lived here 23 years, and I've been a good 10 times in that time, because I'm always finding a friend who's never seen it. I'm like, let me take you. and and never have they said, why did you do that to me? Always they have said, I'm so excited that I finally got to see this, and it's so much fun and so good.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what happens. Maybe this isn't the way most people are, but Los Angeles audiences can be real pains in the ass sometimes. And they laugh at things that aren't cool anymore.
Mm.
Right. So there are moments before the ship turns upside down, when we are establishing character, when people are dressed up in 1972 formal wear,
Mm.
roughly tuxedos, and Pamela Sue Martin has a long red velvet skirt that is concealing the fact that she's wearing matching hot pants underneath. If you don't know what hot pants are, they were a big deal back in the early 70s. They were little short shorts that women would wear. And so she takes off the skirt because she has to climb a Christmas tree to get out of the ballroom after it's turned upside down, a big giant metal Christmas tree. And she has to take off the skirt and she whips it off and she's wearing the hot pants and the audience laughs. Isn't that funny? It's 1971. Look how stupid people dressed back then. There are some clunky bits of dialogue early on when Gene Hackman is establishing who he is as a renegade preacher. And he actually sort of extols his own virtues to another minister on the ship. And he's like, I'm the best kind of minister. I'm a rebel and blah, blah, blah. And I think, you need to calm down. But it is necessary to establish him as the kind of man who doesn't just sit around and pray. He's going to lead this group of people out of the ship, whether God wants them to survive or not. He will fight God if he has to for the survival of the people who have chosen to follow him.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I thought something that was a little dated was the constant references to Shelley Winters' weight.
Oh,
like,
yeah.
There's just a lot of that. Like, she even says it in dialogue, and I'm like, what's that about?
Well, that's in the book.
Oh, that's in the book. Okay.
That's in the book. And the thing is that as Shelley Winters, when she began her career, and I know we're going to get to talking about her a little more in depth. When Shelley Winters began her career, she was very young. She was roommates, buddies, apartment sharing with Marilyn Monroe. Like they were tight. And the studio was trying to sell Shelley Winters in the same way. Like, look at young Shelley Winters. She was what they called a bombshell. Like, she was blonde and buxom and gorgeous, and they put her in these roles where she was like a man trap, right? She got tired of that really quickly. And she wanted to be a character actress. She didn't want to just be pretty on screen. So as time went on, her roles became much more gritty and realistic. And, as she got older, she was in her 50s by the time this film was made. She had put on a little weight, but reportedly she gained even more intentionally to play this character. The reason is because she was one of those early method actors, the kind who would just do whatever it took to play the role. You hear so much now, Robert De Niro had gained 40 pounds to play Raging Bull, and Tom Hanks did the same thing, and then he lost like 40 pounds to be in Philadelphia. You hear about these actors who are putting themselves through crazy physical demands to play a part. You never hear about the women who were method actors who'd be like, oh, you need me to gain 30 pounds? Okay, I'll do it. She did it. And she also knew going in that her fatness was going to be a plot point.
Right.
She didn't care because she was a pro all the time. And there is this in the film, and it came along at a time in American cultural history, a cultural history that we have not abandoned. Let's be real. You can only see me from the chest up in this little video we're doing, but I'm a fat person. And so the way people talk to you when you are fat is not good. They want to always tell you, your health, blah, 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 blah. And you're like, you know what? Thanks. You're the first person in my life to ever say that to me. I had no idea. So this is something that happens in this film a lot. Her fatness is part of not just the part of the plot, but it's part of her character. Because her heroic act in the third act of the movie is sort of an ironic
Right.
thing, because you think, well, we've been carrying her and
Mm.
pushing her and helping her all along the way. Oh, look, a fat person can do something. A fat person can ensure that all the rest of you a-holes are going to live. And they don't make a big deal about it. They just
Hmm.
do it. She just does it. And after that, no one's calling her fatso again. After she saves all of their lives,
That's absolutely
no one's
true.
commenting on her weight anymore. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
Also, so I grew up with Airplane and the Naked Gun movies were some of my favorite comedies as a kid. This movie opens with Leslie Nielsen.
Yes.
And I thought that was a little jarring for me because I'm not that familiar with some of his earlier dramatic films. Like I've
You're
seen
like, oh, is this a comedy?
I'm like I thought that was like
Yeah.
of course those films haven't been made yet. So that's not but it was like jarring for me in 2022 to see Leslie Nielsen open the movie. I liked seeing him in it. He's not in it very much. He's the captain and he gets an and credit. So that was cool.
Yes. Yeah, because he was a star. Um, and he was the kind of star who was in a movie like that.
Mm,
He was one of those handsome, square-jawed, sort of, solid, steady male performers of the era in the
mm-hmm,
50s and the 60s. And you never thought of him as a person who would be in a comedy,
mm-hmm.
ever. Never. Not until Airplane.
Right.
Airplane was trading on the fact that he was meant to be a very serious person. And the comedy of Airplane involves him remaining very serious
Yes.
throughout this absolutely absurd and ridiculous scenario.
Mm-hmm,
And that's the joke. And that's how he wound up in the Naked Gun movies, because there was a TV show after Airplane called
mm-hmm.
Police Squad, where he was the same sort of no nonsense, serious cop, but it was a comedy show very much like Airplane. And that was the deal.
Yeah.
That was Leslie Nielsen. So you're getting him in an era when he was still cast for his gravitas.
Right.
Yeah.
But it was great to see him at the beginning. I wish he could have been in a little bit more of the movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, for the most part, I was watching this last night. I was like, a lot of this holds up really well. Like the big scene at the beginning where the ship tips over, like it looks like that's some sort of like a model or a miniature, like that looked really great. Like
The
the
ship
exterior.
itself, yeah, the exteriors of the ship turning upside down, that is a 22-foot long model that they
Okay.
built. They turned it over in a tank on the,
Mm-hmm.
I guess it's the 20th Century Fox lot. Um, it is currently living at the San Pedro Maritime Museum here in Southern
Oh.
California. And the exteriors that they shot on the Queen Mary, which is docked in Long Beach,
Mm.
um, all the initial scenes of the ship in the rainstorm and the big waves coming at it, those were shot in Long Beach on the deck of that ship. Um, but yeah, when they turn it over, it's a model. It's a big model, but it's a
Mm-hmm.
model. They're turning it over in a tank. And like you said, the turning upside down scene in the ballroom is spectacular.
Mm-hmm.
It is a marvel of editing
Mm-hmm.
and precise action and stunt work. Like, there's a dude who falls from the ceiling into a plate glass window,
That is
and
the most amazing shot.
that is a stunt man doing that. And you only get one shot at that. You
Mm-hmm.
only get to do that one time. They also rigged up explosives so that when the explosion happens and the water bursts into the ballroom,
Mm-hmm.
what I learned in watching, I don't know if it was a commentary or a making of doc, but they didn't tell the extras when
Really?
when they were going to explode that, because they wanted real reactions of fear.
Mm.
And if you watch it carefully, if you've seen it enough times, people are trampling each other.
Mm-hmm.
Like, actors are trampling each other to get away from this water that's going to drown them. The set was set into a tank that could hold about 4 feet of water.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it felt like we're all going to drown.
Mm-hmm.
This camera is shooting like up at that. But there's fire, an explosion, water coming at people, and they are clawing at each other to get out of the way. stuff is falling on people, like stunt people,
Yeah.
obviously, but still, that's gotta hurt. So yeah,
Yeah.
that set and the engine room set are really astonishing.
Hmm.
But every upside down set along the way, if you look at where they're walking, you are noticing that they've really gone for realism on these ceilings as floors. So the floors are covered in pipes and big jagged metal like barriers and stuff that they have to like step over and trip over. Hence, again, as I said earlier, they all got injured during the course of making the film, and that just made it look more real because they all had real cuts and bruises and blood coming off of them.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and just overall, I admired the efficiency of the storytelling. We don't jump around to other groups of characters. We stay with our main group. I
Yeah.
like that it's 2 hours long, not 240 or something, where it's just overstaying its welcome. And when we reach the end, it's out. We're done. We
Yeah.
don't stick around for an epilogue 10-minute scene. Once those 6 people are rescued, the movie's over. I like that about it too.
They condensed the novel, uh, the characters. They condensed the number of characters in the novel, because the number of characters in the novel who are working their way out are a good like 15, 16 people.
Mm.
So they dispensed with some of the more superfluous characters. They folded in some characteristics of the characters that you don't see in the movie into the characters that you see in the movie. Um, in the book, there are lots of other people who have survived the initial turnover,
Hmm.
and they are encountered in the middle of the book in some very harrowing sequences where suddenly the generators fail, the batteries fail, and the lights all go out. So they are, for the second half of the book, they are fumbling through the darkness, and they're also fumbling through people who seek to harm them.
Mm.
I won't go into any more detail than that because it's some pretty, as I said, grim, brutal stuff that takes place in the novel along the way to their rescue at the end. But there's an
Mm.
epilogue. After
Okay.
they're rescued, there's like, here's what happens afterward. Well, they all go here, they all go there. Some of the same people die in the book. Some of the same people don't die in the book. The kid dies in the book.
Oh no, really?
Yeah, the kid dies in the book. He goes off in the film. He goes off to go to the bathroom
Hmm.
because he has to go to the bathroom. And he gets lost, but they find him. In the book, he gets lost, and the lights go out, and they don't find him. He's gone.
Oh, so we don't see his death. It's just like off the
He's
page.
gone, and his parents are with him, and they are like beside themselves, not knowing what to do. Like, do we have to keep moving on with this minister, or do we
Oh,
stay here
right.
and try to find our child? And they're like, we're going to go with the minister. Like the parents just go on, they leave him.
Huh. That
Yeah.
would have been really harrowing in the film. Maybe in the film
Uh-huh.
they could have kept the kid alive, but if like a 10-minute section where the parents are unsure what to do,
Right, right.
that could
And the
have been
parents
interesting.
aren't even in the movie.
And they're not even there. Yeah.
Yeah. The parents are in the book, they're not in the movie.
Yeah. So that's really interesting.
That kid eats it middle of the way through the book.
That's great. What do we think of Gene Hackman's last scene, like where he's hanging off and he's turning that wheel and he's having that long speech and then he falls to his death? It's very theatrical.
Yelling at God. And it's interesting. In the book, he is an intentional suicide.
Oh,
The book, he is bargaining with God and saying, I will sacrifice myself. Like there's some metaphysical stuff going on in the book that the movie just does not have time for. The movie has time for one man's inner rebellion against God, but the book is sort of like, yeah, the preacher sacrificed himself by intentionally dying so
mm-hmm.
that everybody else could live, like just to like show God who's really boss. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
But here in the film, he jumps onto a turning circle thing like a valve,
Valve, yeah.
and there is hot live steam scalding his hands, burning the skin off of him as he is trying to shut the valve off so that everybody can pass through and live. Um, and then he falls to his death because there's just no, like, how can you hang on to that? How do you
Right.
hang on to something like that? You're burning. You're burning. You're going to burn here, or you're going to burn below with the fire beneath you. And so he falls. There is a hesitation before he falls where you think, uh, is he intentionally dropping himself?
Mm.
But then you're sort of like, no, no, I would have already fallen. Like, I would have already lost my grip. That thing would have been too hot for me to hang on to. I would have hoped I was just going to fall into some oily water and not a fire, but
Yeah, and then he hits the water, so I'm assuming he dies because it's engulfed with fire. Is that what you're supposed to believe? I wasn't quite sure.
that's why Linda dies too.
Right.
Everything under them is on fire.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that would make sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was just really taken with this movie. I was very happy to see that it was so successful, that it got 9 Oscar nominations. It's
Yeah.
kind of an interesting year in that, like, the 2 big Oscar players for 72 are Cabaret and The Godfather. Those
Yeah.
are the ones winning a lot. They get into Best Picture. Poseidon
Yeah.
Adventure does not get in for Best Picture, but
Yeah.
it's in a lot of categories, and it wins Best Visual Effects, and it wins Best Original Song.
Yep.
What do you think of the song? The Morning After.
When I was 7, I was already buying little records with my allowance, and I bought that record
Oh,
because
okay.
if I can't see this movie, I'm at least going to listen to the song. And the song is in the film, sung by another person. Carol Lindley is lip syncing to another vocalist. There's a singer named Maureen McGovern who is still very much with us, and she sang that song. And I think her performance of that song, the single version that was released, is actually a great song. Like,
Mm-hmm.
it's a good song. She went on to sing the song from the Towering Inferno, which was not a good song. She also went on to sing the theme song from a very popular sitcom in the late 70s called Angie.
Okay.
And the theme song to that sitcom was also a radio top 40 hit. The 70s were a really weird time. Yeah, things like that happened all the time. I just want to give a bit of a while we're talking about Carol Lindley.
Yeah.
I think her performance in this film is one of my favorites. In fact, she and Stella Stevens are 2 of my favorite performances in the film, because as mean as Stella Stevens' character is supposed to be, she has such a warm face, and she loves her husband so much, and she is not a terrible person. And so by the end of it, when she dies, you really feel her death. I think she's a wonderful actress. And there was a moment in the 90s when Alonzo, my husband, was a film festival programmer, and he programmed this film because it had been included in a book called Bad Movies We Love. And so he did a little mini sidebar at this film festival where he would screen a film that was featured in this book, and the authors of the book came in to talk about the film. But Stella Stevens also came to the film festival.
Oh, cool.
About it. And when they did the Q&A after, she said, I just want to say, this is not a bad movie. I know it's in the book, but this is not a bad movie. I think it's a great movie. And we all, applauded Stella Stevens for standing up for the greatness of this film. But getting back to Carol Lindley, I think her performance in this film is truly extraordinary, because she is constantly in a state of panic and shock, to the point where there is a scene, again, let's go back to the repertory audiences who are too cool for everybody. After the ship turns upside down and her brother has been killed in the capsizing, she's sort of touching his hair and trying to bring him back to life. She's like, please wake up, please wake up, please wake up. The actor Red Buttons comes up to her and he says, I'm sorry, your brother's dead. And they were in the characters they played were, she was the lead singer of a band and he was the drummer. And she says to Red Buttons, did you like his music? Which is a weird thing to say, after someone tells you that your brother is dead. But if you're in a state of shock, not just at the circumstances that you find yourself in, but the fact that the brother you love very much is dead on the ground in front of you, you're going to say any weird thing. But the audience here, every time they screen it, the audience laughs at that line. And I always want to say, you shut up right now. She's grieving. This woman is grieving. She spends the film in that state of grief and shock and panic, and the screaming and fear that she delivers throughout feels so real, that it's sort of like it's an underrated performance.
Yeah. So do you feel like Shelley Winters being singled out? She won the Golden Globe. She gets nominated for the Oscar. She loses to Eileen Heckert for Butterflies Are Free. Like, do you think that Shelley Winters was the right actor to single out, or do you think one of these other underrated performances should have been recognized too?
I think that what was always going to happen was that the respected veteran was going to get the nomination.
Yeah,
that happens all the time.
Right.
And Shelley Winters had already had a very long career, where she had committed herself to, as I said earlier, doing anything. She was in Roger Corman exploitation films. She was in Diary of Anne Frank as a person so annoying, a character in the Diary of Anne Frank who is so annoying that you think, oh my God, I would not want to be in that attic stuck with her for 3 years. Like, she was always willing to go there and be an unlikable character. And here, she's a lovable character. You were rooting for her the whole way. She's warm and kind and talking about her grandchildren and caring for the kids in the movie. She's, caring for the other adults in the movie. She's being insulted by some of them left and right, and she doesn't stop. She is a caretaker in the film. And so that kind of goodwill that you generate, I think, Academy voters, they're like, oh, we love her, and oh, look, she has a sad death scene. So they love to reward that kind of thing. Now, she didn't win, but
yeah, she was probably in second place if she got the Golden Globe, and like she was probably up there, but she'd already won 2 before, so it's not like they were, Ingrid Bergman won a third one in the 70s, but
she had 2 Academy Awards.
Yeah. Yeah. So as we move along here to the remake and the sequel, I wanted to ask you first about the sequel. Have you seen the 79 Beyond the Poseidon Adventure? What's this all about?
It is a very, 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 very bad film.
Not any good, huh? Michael Caine, Sally Field.
Everything that you love about this 1972 film is what you might hate about the 1979 sequel. They reverse the unique quality of the fact that 6 people live at the end of the first film. They go back and they take some of the elements from the original novel and put them into the 1979 film. Paul Gallico did write a sequel book as well. So technically, the Beyond the Poseidon Adventure film is an adaptation of that novel. I have not read that novel. But yeah, it sucks. It is boring. There's not an ounce of excitement in it. You don't care about what happens to anybody because they're all just like thieves and rogues and stuff like that. People have, like, a pirate ship has come to steal the gold. Apparently there's treasure on the ship. Like, it's stupid and not good at all.
Yeah, I think Sally Field was asked once in an interview, like, what's your worst movie? And she didn't even blink. She said, Beyond the Poseidon Adventure.
Beyond the Poseidon Adventure, yeah. Like, I remember watching it on cable because I think Shirley Jones is the greatest and she's in it too.
Okay.
And even I was like, oh, Mrs. Partridge, what are you doing? Like, you're not, this is bad. This is very bad. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then the remake in 2006, directed by Wolfgang Peterson, opens. A big cast: Richard Dreyfuss, Kurt Russell, Emmy Rossum. Like, what did you make of the remake?
Hated it. First of all, it's unnecessary. Don't remake a good movie. Remake a bad movie and make it better. Don't remake a good movie and then have it there for people to compare so that they can see how like crappy your new one is. Everything that made the 1972 version exciting again has been sort of drained from this.
Mm.
Uh, there are fancier special effects, but there are no stakes with computer generated effects. There are no stakes. You know it's a cartoon. They're acting in front of a cartoon. They're acting in front of a green screen, and they're putting whatever they want behind those actors on the green screen. Nothing feels right about this remake. It's first of all, it's really long and it's exhausting. It's just terrible. It's a pointless, unnecessary remake.
Yeah. So I think this was a property we should have just left it at the one film and just moved on.
Leave it. Yeah. And you asked me in the pre-notes what double feature I would make. The original Poseidon Adventure. I would say watch the original Poseidon Adventure and then don't double feature it, but like a week later, watch the 2006 version. Let's all go to film school and see why you just shouldn't do these kinds of things. Let's compare the two and let's see who the winner is. We know who the winner is. It's this one.
Yeah. Divine double feature, my segment at the end here is interesting in that we often will pick, like, if there is a remake that's come out in the last 20 years of the film from the early 70s, that's kind of a go-to choice. I was thinking about choosing that too, because you can kind of see where in some ways Hollywood has gone wrong 32 years later after the first one came out. And I do think, I mean, yes, in Poseidon, there might be better special effects and things, but there's not that character work that's done so well in the 72 version. And that's what's lacking in the 06.
Other thing, exactly. You don't get the performances out of the people. And that's not the actor's fault. Actors are directed to performances. Actors are edited into performances. So you've got a good take and it doesn't get used. That's not on you, the actor. That's on the person who edited the film and the director who said, oh, no. We don't like this really good take that we got. Let's put this like terrible one in instead for who knows whatever reason. So I blame Wolfgang Peterson. That's who I blame. It should not have happened. This is a film that should not exist.
Yeah. So I think, I mean, that would be an interesting choice to just kind of compare the two. I also went with, I kind of have a guilty pleasure enjoyment of 2012 starring John Cusack. I don't know if you absolutely despise that movie, but that would all.
I dig that one too.
Okay. Yeah. But that would be my choice just because it is just like in your face craziness. Yeah. And it's very much a movie more of our kind of fast paced times of the same genre. I mean, there's San Andreas with The Rock, but there haven't been as many of these kinds of movies in the last 2 decades.
No, there haven't been. There was a huge, wave of them, no pun intended, in the 70s. But the ones we've gotten in the past 10 years, 2012, San Andreas, they've all been fun and they're all rock stupid. They're fun to watch. I particularly enjoyed Kylie Minogue's scene in San Andreas where she runs out of a building and falls to her death. But yeah, 2012 is great because it just gets weirder and goofier and sillier as it goes on. And by the end of it, you're thinking, oh, okay, you're just gonna, I don't even remember how it ends, but other than they have to like repopulate the earth or something.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my memory of John Cusack, I think they're taking off in that plane and the building's crumbling and coming at the plane. And you just have a close up of Cusack going, whoa. And he's just like on a stage looking at nothing, and it's all silly, but it's kind of fun. I don't know.
The 70s were the golden age of the disaster.
Yes.
Like you get this. Before the Poseidon Adventure, you had the first airport film, which was more like a big soap opera kind of movie with a disaster in the middle of it, a bomb on an airplane. But because of the Poseidon Adventure, then you got Airport 1975, which is really silly, but kind of thrilling. 2 more airport movies after that became increasingly ridiculous. The Towering Inferno, Avalanche, Earthquake with the then brand new in theater special effect called Sense Around, which was a goofy gimmick where giant bass speakers were set up in the movie theater, and they would turn them on to such low distressing frequencies, like bowel disturbing frequencies, that when the earthquake happens in the movie Earthquake, the seats would vibrate. And it was, man, that came out when I was 12, and I ran right out to see that with the Sense Around in the theater. So I was so happy. You're a kid and you're like, wow, a fun thing that's, the seats are going to shake when I watch the earthquake. Um, yeah, I saw that like 2 or 3 times. I was so stoked for that one.
Like some William Castle showmanship. Like there's going to be more
Fully,
to the movie.
absolutely. It was fully the William Castle experience. Yeah.
Yeah, the one I'm most looking forward to is probably the Towering Inferno. I've never seen that. Same producer, right? It's Irwin Allen again,
Yep.
and it's Paul Newman, I think, is the lead of that.
Paul Newman, Steve McQueen, Fred Astaire,
Wow, and I
Faye
think it got a
Dunaway.
picture nomination, if I'm not
Yeah, it
mistaken.
did. Faye Dunaway. God, I'm blanking now.
Hey,
Robert
Dunaway's in it too. Oh my God.
O.J. Simpson is in this movie. Jennifer Jones, like these old
Yeah.
timey people, and um, it is it's really long. It's like
Oh,
about
okay.
a 3-hour movie,
Ugh.
and it is best experienced on the biggest. If you're going to watch it at home on a TV, if you have a very large TV
Yeah.
screen, turn off your phone. Don't let there be any distractions, because you want it to be as big as it can be. Because it's not as good as Poseidon.
Right.
Performances are a little cornier, but the effects, and the fire and all that stuff. Again, it was the '70s, so it was real stuff. There's some really harrowing sequences of people trying to be rescued and then dying. It's one of those movies, just like Poseidon, where people are just routinely picked off one by one as the fire rages through this skyscraper.
Yeah. Well, I'm interested in that one. It's coming up here in just a couple years for me on the podcast.
Yeah.
Our final segment, Beyond the Flick, I thought we'd just talk a little bit about Shelley Winters. So what are some other films of hers that you've seen, Oscar nominated or winning or not Oscar nominated, that you would recommend to our listeners?
Well, she, like I said earlier, she got started in Hollywood. They were marketing her as like the sexy lady.
Mm-hmm.
And she quickly got tired of that, because she was studying the method with Marilyn. So they were, she was like, I'm not going to be this like sex pot lady. She wound up in a movie called A Place in the Sun, where she played a factory worker who was not sexy. She was, in fact, a tragic character who falls in love with Montgomery Clift, and he dates her. She gets pregnant. He falls for Elizabeth Taylor. Shelley Winters is like, no, I'm going to have your baby, and if you don't marry me, I'm going to tell everybody what you're really doing. And so he kills her, and that's not the funny part, but like the fact that this movie existed when it did, it brushed up against censorship at the time, but it was like her first Academy Award nomination. She won for Diary of Anne Frank, and now
Patch of Blue is the other one.
One Diary of Anne Frank. Again, she's great in Diary of Anne Frank. She's great in Stanley Kubrick's Lolita.
Yes.
She is, as she got older, she was, like I said, she was in Roger Corman movie like this one called Bloody Mama.
I saw that. Yeah.
Like Ma Parker.
Robert De Niro's in it.
Yeah. She was in a hippie exploitation film called Wild in the Streets, where she's like one of the establishment ladies who gets put in a concentration camp at the end for adults. Like if you were over 30, they put you in a camp. It's just insane, crazy movie. Again, it's called Wild in the Streets. Heartily recommend that. Later in the '70s, she was in a post-Jaws monster movie called Tentacles, about a giant octopus that eats people. She's cool in that. Like, there was never a moment in Shelley Winters' life, on camera or off, where she wasn't really cool and exciting to watch. And if I'm going to recommend anything for anybody to go watch immediately right now, it is a YouTube clip of Shelley Winters on The Tonight Show in the 1970s. That's when Johnny Carson was the host of The Tonight Show.
Mm-hmm.
She's a guest on The Tonight Show. So is the actor Oliver Reed, legendary actor Oliver
Mm-hmm.
Reed. She is annoying Oliver Reed so much on the couch that he's like telling her, please be quiet, please be quiet. But you could tell that she was taking great delight in getting up his nose. And eventually, he starts talking about how the women's liberation movement and feminism are terrible and that women should be at home taking care of their men. And some of the audience applauds for this. Again, it's the 1970s. She takes her drink, because they were all drinking on these talk shows back in the day. They all had cocktails in their hands. She takes her drink and she pours it on Oliver Reed's head. And more of the audience applauded that than his misogynist comments. It is one of her best performances.
What is Reed just keeps talking, or is that the end of the clip?
Oh, yeah. No. She pours the booze on his head and he keeps talking. He's like, I will not retaliate. That would be ungentlemanly. Like, he was a case. Like, he was his own thing, that Oliver Reed. But she wasn't having it.
Yeah.
She was great all the time, just in life and on screen.
Yeah. I love how you put it into words, how she started as this bombshell and then she chose to move into character roles. And I love her work in Lolita and so many of these excellent films of the 50s and 60s. Night of the Hunter is excellent. That's one of my favorites with her,
if you are a woman in Hollywood and they type you early as sexy, you better watch out for your career, because the minute you get to be too old to be sexy, and by too old, I mean 35, they get rid of you. You're lucky to get a TV gig. You know, you're in a Hallmark movie playing someone's mom, even though you're only 10 years older than they are. Like, if you are objectively hot, and this happens to men too, if you are objectively hot, you better watch out for your career longevity, because they will just get rid of you. Colin Farrell learned this early on. They were trying to market him as just a hot guy.
Right.
He came along and he was cast in terrible film after terrible film, and none of them were big movies anyway. You know, they put him in SWAT, the SWAT movie. Remember that?
Yeah. And Daredevil.
He thought to himself, I'm not going to do this anymore. He started acting in little indie movies, playing characters. So he's got the looks of Colin Farrell. He's a character actor now. He didn't look back. He was like, I'm just doing this. I want to be an actor. I don't want to just be a piece of meat that people think is sexy.
Right. Yeah. So you get In Bruges, The Lobster. You get his newest film, The Banshees of Inisherin, which I just saw last weekend, is excellent. And yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I think Shelley Winters, if she had continued that road of just being the bombshell, some of her best work that we got later in her career never would have happened.
She would have wound up on TV, and that's that.
Yeah.
That's it.
Exactly.
Back then, that was back in the day when you got demoted to television. You know, it wasn't the same as it is now, where you can just do whatever you want on any platform you want. Back in the day, if you were a movie star, that was great. If you were a TV star, that was sort of like, you're fine, you're on TV, but you're not a movie star. You know what I mean? Well, it's reversed now.
Yeah. Well, what a career. 4 Oscar nominations, 2 wins. I need to see her 2 Oscar-winning roles. I'm really excited to check those out. That takes us to the end here, Dave. This was so much fun to talk about Poseidon Adventure with you. This is one of the biggest films of the year on the podcast, and couldn't have imagined a better guest. This was a lot of fun.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always willing to talk about the Poseidon Adventure with anybody.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, I'd love for you to talk about where our listeners can find you online. If you have anything you'd like to promote, now would be the time.
Well, as we said at the very beginning, I am one of many film critics for The Wrap. You can go read my work there. Primarily what I'm writing about is art house stuff.
Mm.
So movies, big movies like the Poseidon Adventure, I almost never cover those films. For The Wrap, I cover little Romanian movies, that are fantastic, and you should go read my review and go see those movies because I'm telling you to. I co-host a podcast called Linoleum Knife with my husband, Alonzo Duraldi. He's also a film critic for The Wrap. He's also my editor at The Wrap, which is a fun set of circumstances. We've been doing that for 12 years.
Wow.
We were podcasting before it was cool. And now we're podcasting after it stopped being cool. So like, we're just going to do it until it becomes cool again. You can find me on social media, on Twitter at D Leland White. That's my middle name is Leland, Leland, very old middle name. D Leland White on Twitter and Instagram. And I guarantee you that if you follow me on either of those social media platforms, you will get very, very little film content out of me because it's already my job. I don't have time for that when I'm not working. Yeah.
I love it. Well, thanks for being here, Dave. This was so much fun. Thanks to all of you for listening. You can find us online at filmat50.com. We're on Twitter and Instagram. And until next time, remember, 50 never looked this good.